So hello everyone, nice to see you. I'm Reverend Will Burhans. I'm the lead pastor here and want to welcome you to our Ripley Presents series here at First Congregational Church in Winchester, a series that we carry on throughout the year, and we have various concerts and events that happen in here. And tonight, I really am thrilled to welcome back, because he was here last year as well, a good friend of mine and Tracy's, Stephen Kiernan, who is a wonderful writer, has been telling stories since 1988. He has written 5 million words over the course of his career. He was for 20 years a journalist and then began writing books. And there are 7 of those out there now, some of which are on the back table. And we want to thank our beloved local bookstore, Bookends, for being present here and for making those books available. And Stephen, after his talk, will be available to sign as well. I want to also remember to welcome those of you who are online. It's good to have you here with us. We're so glad you can tune in from wherever you are. So Stephen, he's from Vermont. That's how my wife and I know him. And he has 2 sons who live in New York City. And his latest book is The Glass Chateau, which I think many of you have read. And there's more back there after you hear more about this. If you haven't read it, you will want to. And just a tidbit of information here that Stephen spent 3 months in Eastern France to write this book. Was a profound experience for him, interviewing people, experiencing the making of stained glass and writing in Eastern France. And what you have and what you've been reading is the fruit of that experience. But really want to welcome you, Stephen. Come on down.
Hooray! Thank you, buddy. Thank you. Thank you all for being here. And lots of thanks first to my good buddy, Will, who's brought me here for a second time, and it means I get to break bread with you and Tracy and get to spend time with you. I'm also really appreciative of Brian for taking care of the technology. We had a really nice technology panic a couple of hours ago, but everything's serene now, isn't it? I hope. And Jane is taking care of things and has the raffle ready to go. Is that right? Yes, terrific. And then the bookstore, we shouldn't think, they have to do all the heavy lifting. They bring those big, heavy boxes of books in here, and what would be worse than for them to have to carry those big, heavy boxes of books out here? So just as a favor to them, I'll tell you what, if you're going to somebody's house for Thanksgiving dinner, they don't want a candle. They really don't. They really want a signed book. I'm telling you, they'll be much happier. Yeah, that's my wise guy for the night. I'm going to be serious the whole time. There's going to be no humor here. I'm going to talk about my book some, but I'm not. That's kind of the background of this story. What I really want to talk about is the power of art as an instrument of healing. And I would just start with this idea. 3 years ago, it would have been a big deal for this many people to be in one room together. It would have been hazardous, right? We probably would have been masked. Probably half of you would not be here. And so there's this progress that's occurred. And what I find is I'm going to events now with a different appreciation for them, simply because there's a spontaneous community that happens, that we're actually able to be with each other again. We are a social species. We're not quite dogs. We're not all like in a puppy pile right now, but almost. No, but I think there's that coming together, and so I'm honored by your presence. So what I'm going to do, there's going to be some art history in this, but I want you to know that I'm not an art historian. I've never taken a class in art, and I've never taken a class in history. When I was in college, I had a friend who was taking an art history class, and I said, how is it? And he said, death by slideshow. So I promise, there is a PowerPoint with this, but I give you my guarantee in advance, because I'm not an art historian, there will be no death by slideshow. Are there any art history majors in this room, by the way? Okay, then I should have asked before I told that joke. Oh, okay, thanks for being here. So let me talk about the book for a minute, and then we'll put it aside. So first, if you could just go a little sort of thought experiment. Imagine a country that is damaged. It's on a hard time, and it very much needs rebuilding. But the people are all totally polarized. They are polarized politically. They're polarized culturally. They're polarized in what media they consume. They're polarized religiously. They're polarized economically. There's even a former president who goes around holding rallies critical of the current president. I know this is impossible for you to imagine. It's just a complete leap of the imagination, but that's what France was like 1 month after the Second World War. And that's when this book takes place. And if you think that this is just some cheesy analogy and some allegory from the World War II that is supposed to apply to now, you are right. That's what this is. And the main character is a fellow named Asher, and he is a Jewish man who saw his family killed early on in the war. And so he went into the woods and became an assassin for the resistance. And 19 people that he dispatched. And it was very much retail. His hands around their throat, or he's holding the knife that goes into their belly, that sort of thing. At the end of the war, he's got enormous grief, and he also has enormous guilt, because he's a man with a conscience who killed 19 people, what the war required of him. He goes back to his home, it's been destroyed. He goes back to his workshop for his business, and it's flattened. He goes to the synagogue, the attendant, it's been burned to the ground. He has nothing. He has nothing. His friends are gone, all of it. And he also doesn't really believe in God anymore, because he can't imagine the existence of a God in a place like this, in a world like this. And he wanders the highways and byways of France for months, and eventually he arrives, simply because he's starving, at this chateau where he's going to try and get a meal. It turns out this chateau has been making stained glass windows for 425 years. And they bring him in because they need a hired hand. And so he gets meals and a roof over his head. There are other men at this chateau. They are all damaged. The war has hurt every one of them in some fashion. There's only one person who's actually physically wounded. Everyone else, it's a psychic wound. It's an emotional injury that they're trying to recover from. And so they are all very easily triggered. They're quick to anger. They're all carrying hidden weapons. And there's a lot of animosity between all of them, except when they're making windows together. And it turns out that when they are working in common purpose, they forget about their weapons. They forget about their differences. And they begin to build something. And I don't want to give away any more than that, except to say that they end up transcending the whole idea of what is possible for people to build. So that's the setting for this. That's what sort of got me into this game. That's the Glass Chateau. So when I was working on this idea, I said, well, if they're going to make stained glass windows, they're going to have to be the coolest stained glass windows ever. And the problem is, I don't know anything about stained glass windows. Nothing at all. So there are two questions that I had as I really entered the enterprise of this book. The first one is, where can I find some incredibly cool stained glass? And the second thing is this book a fairy tale? Is the idea of people working together like this a wish that I have, or is it an actual possibility? And I will tell you, what I'm going to talk about for the next little bit is about my endeavor to answer those two questions. And by the way, when I'm done here, if you have more questions, feel free, okay? And you can ask me anything, by which I mean you can ask me anything, okay? So where I started was that I wrote a book that was set in France 7 years ago called The Baker's Secret. And when I was doing the research online before I went over to France to see the places I was writing about, I kept finding these pictures of blown up cathedrals, that they were targets. It was true desecration, making something desacredized, desacred by destroying it. And you saw, this one's in Britain, and you saw all over Europe the destruction of the houses of worship. This is a German cathedral, just so you know that we will equal opportunity sacrilege between the two countries. And this one is a Cathedral of Notre Dame, but not in Paris, in Reims, which is in eastern France, about 40 miles from Strasbourg. And there are two things. One is to notice that the ceiling is on the floor. And the second thing is those three windows that you see that are kind of opened up back there, after the war, the first thing they did was board them up so they would be dry, and they put a wooden roof on before they rebuilt it. But for now, there's just sunlight shining through those three openings. And if you just remember that a little bit, we'll come back to those three windows. The first thing I did to find out about stained glass was I went to my local library. I live in a town in Vermont that has about 3,000 residents, and our entire library has about the same square footage as this room. However, they also participate in interlibrary loan. And so they're connected to the library of Middlebury College and the University of Vermont and Dartmouth College. So I had something on the range of about 5 million books to choose from, and they were able to get me what I wanted. And I know the libraries are taking a real beating in America, and I know that in Massachusetts they're not. This is the state, the home of the first public library on earth. You know this? And but I can tell you there are places that I've gone where to speak. I spoke at a library in Indiana, for example, that had spent about 2 years fighting over 2 books and what shelves they should be on, and so on. But anyway, what they told me was there was a guy in Vitebsk, Belarus, and I probably am saying it wrong, but a guy who was doing some pretty interesting stuff with glass around this time. And this is a map, just so you see. Now, this is the map spells it differently, but that's still Vitebsk in Belarus. And where that is, to give you an idea, is in the middle of this one, so somewhere between the Lithuanian border and Moscow. Okay? In those areas, so this person, his name is Moishe Shegel. And Moishe Shegel grew up in a shtetl where 100% of the population was Jewish, although the whole of the population of the area was about 55% Jewish. They were Hasidic, and they dressed Hasidic, and they had the hair and beard of Hasidic people. It was a deeply religious community, very conservative. The prevailing language was Yiddish. There was enormous poverty, but there was also agriculture, so they usually fed well, but had very few possessions. And because it was near Russia, you know, there were long, long winters there. This is where Moishe grew up. And just to give you a perspective of what happened to this whole area, which was called the Pale. The town that Moishe grew up in had 50,000 residents before the war and had 186 residents after the war. So not all the Jewish people were slaughtered in the camps. Many of them were murdered in mass shootings in places like these shtetls, where no one owned a gun unless they were a hunter. And so that was that. So pretty much destroyed. So this is what Moishe has as a background. Now, the thing I'll tell you, he lived 98 years, and you know him, and you know his art, even if you don't recognize the name. And here's the way I describe it. You know, when I was 20 years old, I worked for a construction company and I was on the demolition team, which is actually about a perfect thing for a 20-year-old. Just give them a sledgehammer and say, take that wall down. It's like heaven. I should have been paying them. And we were working on this very, very old house in Vermont, and we took a break at lunchtime. And we're sitting out on the lawn, just like we know we got to go back. It's really hard labor. It's a really hot day. And this woman goes by who's a friend of mine, college classmate. She's 20 years old. She's working in a women's dress shop. She's on her way to work, and she stops to ask if I want to have a drink after work. Do we want to have a beer? And I say, absolutely. And she leaves, and for the whole rest of the day, everyone on that crew called me Romeo. Right? Now, I'm willing to bet that most of the other guys on the demolition team were not actually experts in Shakespearean tragedy. And they didn't know Romeo and Juliet, but yet they sort of knew. They sort of knew that there was an association with that name and romance and giving me a hard time. It's the same with Moishe. You don't know him except you do. And I'll give you an example. When he was 20 years old, the same age as I was then, he was living in Moscow in a freezing cold apartment, no heat, for 2 floors down, actually shared a bed with another man who was a tenant because they couldn't afford his own bed and that sort of thing. And the other man was a drunkard and all these things. It was very down and out times. And his job was painting backdrops for the Moscow Opera. And there was one where he was, you know, and the sooner he got done, the sooner he was paid. And so he did one, and he painted this man who's 4 times the size of the church in the painting, and he's sort of dancing along the top of the houses playing his violin. And it was from his childhood and the stories he'd heard, and of course we know it as the origin of the Fiddler on the Roof. That's where it came from. If I Were a Rich Man started with Moishe's painting. So it's just like Romeo. You know him even though you don't know him. And maybe you will know him when I get to a little further along. But that's just to say, and by the way, he's doing some weird stuff. The violin is two-toned. The man's face is green. You see that he is bigger than the cathedral behind him. There's something that's surreal, but sort of in a folk art way. It's not offensive. It's not too weird. It's just different. Now, I got to see some of his art when there was a retrospective at the museum up in Montreal, which is the nearest city to where I live, and there was his costumes that he made for theater. The fish one was a very interesting one for me because the actor could stand, the characters were always played except for the actor's head. So you look at these, there's a head above the actor's head, or the actor's head is concealed. He didn't want you to think about the human in there. So in this case, if the actor stood one way, it was a human face, and if they stood the other way, it was a fish. Genius, right? So I was already intrigued by this guy, and then when I found out he was doing amazing things, well, I'll get to that. To give you a contrast, here's what else was going on in art at the time. This is a Cubist painting. This is Picasso's portrait of Jimi Hendrix. And of course, it's not Jimi Hendrix, or the guitar would be left-handed. I knew you'd get that. Right? But the point is that all the experimentation that was going on at that time was in form, except for Moishe. His experimentation was in content. All kinds of things where he just broke the rules. And a cat had a human face, and a man might have two faces, which is, of course, a cliche, right? Somebody's two-faced. You see a couple going head-to-head about something. You have all kinds of surreal things, great colors. In this case, we're back in the shtetl, and everything is as it was, except we have a fried egg for a moon, and we have a horse and wagon flying through the air, of course, as they do. This is his trapeze artist. This one is called The Village is in My Heart. This is from later years. You may have seen this, pretty famous one. You know, all kinds of stuff going on there. Really interesting, beautiful. But what's interesting about these paintings, this one with the mermaid really strikes me for a lot of reasons. The fish is, when you read my book, you'll see there's a lot of fish, the flying fish in it. But part of what's striking about this is that it's based on a real place. Now, how is this based on a real place? Do you see that little yellow building about under the moon? Okay, so this is a picture of the city of Nice, France, where this artist lived in the later part of his life. It's taken from a place called La Perouse, which is the tip of the letter C that is sort of the shape of the bay. And that place, La Perouse, is where James Joyce wrote the last third or so of Ulysses, and it's where I wrote the last third or so of The Glass Chateau, with like James over my shoulder, like, that's no good, that's no good. But the point is, it's a real place, and yet this is what his imagination does with that reality, and how he expresses the bounty of the place. Where I like his work really reaches me more is when he's painting about love in a cold Russian winter. If we are lucky, we know the elevation that happens in a time of infatuation. If we are lucky, we know what it is like to go through life with someone as though you're riding the same horse. I want to look at one painting in detail, just one, I promise, just to show you how many cool things he has going on at a time. I'll go faster after this. First, I want you to notice that little guy in yellow in the lower left-hand corner. I'll come back to him. But this is an Adam and Eve painting, okay? I'm just going to give you a couple details. There are all of these animals and creatures in it that are very expressive. Even though it's a bird, there's joy. And again, there's two heads, which I think is to create a sense of motion. Animals, again, with human expression. The fish and the mermaid, who is part fish. There's an angel and a bird, and they're sort of one and the same. There's this woman, and she's being menaced by some kind of a monster. And you can see some stuff along the top there. And what it is an upside-down painting of the shtetl that he grew up in. Okay, he's playing in all kinds of ways. And it's just to say, I'm going to show you a bunch of his work later, and we won't be able to dwell on it. It's just to say there are a million things going on. This is a painting, when you walk up to it, it's about 5 feet by 8 feet. You can stand there for 45 minutes. And you're not like just being awed by it, you're just reading it because there's so much going on there that's really cool and interesting. And of course, I mentioned that naked male character in the lower corner because this painter always worked naked. It's just his thing. And so when he left Eastern Europe and came to Western Europe and came to Paris, the first thing was he needed to conceal the fact that he was Jewish because it was still dangerous. Even though the war was over, it was still dangerous. And it's where I got the idea to have a character. My book is not about this artist, but it is about that challenge of something as fundamental as your faith being a thing that you need to conceal. So this is a painting of him with his westernized name, Marc Chagall. And now you'll notice that when he's doing this painting, that his shirt, first of all, is clean, so you know he just put it on, right? And also, like the seam, like where it's been pressed, is still there. Like that's not how you dress when you're painting. And I'm willing to bet that he was wearing nothing 10 seconds before this picture, and in fact, that shirt is all he's wearing, right? But this is Marc Chagall, and we know him as this great painter, right? His real name is Moshe. There you go. Okay, and really, really interesting face. Really interesting expression on this man's face. But he also made stained glass windows. He made stained glass windows like you cannot imagine. I'll show you a little of them in a minute. First, I need to talk about stained glass windows in general. These are considered some of the most beautiful stained glass windows in the world. They're at Sainte-Chapelle in Paris. Okay, they were done as a commission for the king, Louis XVI. Okay, now what do you think when you see those? When you see that stained glass, what comes to mind? How do you feel? Formal. Yes, in fact, there's very strict pillars going up. There are 3 of them and going up through the middle, straight arrows, and you see actually that there are lines across horizontally every so often to help with the weight of the glass. Also, very, very much formal. What else? The colors. Yes, in fact, this window is showing off. It takes cobalt to make blue. It takes titanium to make brown and yellow, and to make red, it takes gold. The more red you are in a painting, the more you are saying, I'm rich. This is a king who likes having lots of red in his stained glass windows. What else? Inspired. Yes, inspired. It's impressive, isn't it? This is somebody's got some windows, man. This is the Humvee of windows, right? How about, what's the content like? Can't really tell, right? It's pretty, you can sort of see in the bottom, I mean, there's medallions, right? And there's something going on inside those medallions. But it's awfully hard to tell, except maybe the first level, like you can see, you can see just the one guy in red there, in that lowest one. But after that, you can't really tell. And in fact, I feel like you need to be about 15 or 20 feet higher to be able to see what's going on there. You literally need to be lofty. You need to be king, right? You can't be just the common rabble. Common rabble doesn't get to see this whole window. They get to be impressed by it and see the wealth of it and the formality of it. Underneath this exact chapel, there is another chapel with stained glass windows on it. Same problem. You can't see the windows. It's not for you to see. The people of France loved this king and his idea of the common man so much that they took away his throne and then they cut his head off, and the head of his wife, and the head of every person of power and persuasion and royalty. 13,000 people, in fact, lost their heads. That's how much they loved this guy. But it is sort of the tradition of greatness in stained glass windows. A thing that may delight you is the next time you come into this room, take a look at the windows here and see how you feel, particularly these. See how you feel. I think it'll be a very different experience. So now this is the cover of a book about Chagall's windows. And I just want to start by saying he broke all the rules. And he did it on purpose, and he did it with glee. There's actual humor in it. So for example, just this little bit here, you notice that the bar going up the thing is not one of those columns. He's goofing with it, which takes a certain amount of engineering skill, but also he wants play to be part of it, even if it's in a cathedral. There's a chapel outside of New York City in Westchester County that is a private chapel of the Rockefeller family. And whenever somebody was of the real patriarchy of the family died, they would commission a window from Chagall for their chapel, which is smaller than this one. And there are 8 Chagall windows in there, sort of in the must be nice category. And they would let me in after some finagling, but they wouldn't let me take any pictures because they don't want to encourage theft. They don't want to have to guard it. They can't possibly insure it. It's so valuable. But when I was going back to my car, I took a picture from the outside. That is not the same as King Louis's windows. Something else is going on. It looks like a lot of fun. It might be ugly, but it might be pretty cool. I'm just going to show some images here. Crowds, human faces, a blue planet. When you die, an angel will take you where you go to rest. I love this one because not only is there an angel, but you see the blue bird? He's actually perched on the crossbar. The form becomes the content. He's really playing around. This is his biggest window. It's at the Art Institute of Chicago. It starts 2 feet off the ground. You can see the whole thing. This is a democratic window. This is a window for the common man. This is a window in which the common man may see himself. And there's a little bit of red. But it's a commission, you know? This is where Chagall was going. This is amazing windows he did at a hospital in Jerusalem. And just imagine the detail in all of those windows. And, you know, that one it's a little bit above, but it's so well lit that you can still really see what's going on. This is Chagall at 92. He's at his last big window, which is the window for peace and happiness in Dag Hammarskjöld Plaza at the United Nations. And it's really interesting to have seen his stuff that he did after the war and the anguish that's there and the struggle that's there and the shtetl and so on. And then you get to when he's 92 years old and everyone's naked. There's lots of lovers, lots of babies. And I just love thinking about this guy at 92, just feeling like he loves the world, right? And I don't know if you can tell, but there's a donkey with a human face being petted by a human with a donkey face. His relationship with the animal world. So this is the cathedral that had the ceiling on the floor, and it had those 3 windows with window spaces with no windows in them. And here's what Chagall did with them. And remember, this is a Jewish man, but there's crucifixion in it, except it's really not a crucifixion. It's much more an open embrace. I want to hug the world. Love your neighbor as you love yourself. Pretty great work. So the first question is answered. There is an extraordinary window out there. There's great glass being done. And so some of my book, I will take scenes from Chagall's paintings and windows, and they will occur in the book. I have cows flying through the air. I have owls that turn into rabbis, and so on. And as I say, I'm not using Chagall's life, but often his art appears in some of the windows that he made these characters are making. I want to give you one example. This is one of his earliest drawings. There's one earlier than this, but this one really affected me because it's very simple. It's a square, or it's a rectangle that is the house, a couple of rectangle windows. There's a triangle for the roof. There's a man sitting on the chimney, and there's a woman downstairs who's saying "Oy vey," right? And he's about 14 years old, but the perspective, if you look, is actually from below. So I think it's a 14-year-old imagining himself younger, 5 years old, something like that. I'm going to read, but I'm going to read 2 paragraphs. I promise, it's painless. Okay, it's just to show how he would work his way into this. Because once I started immersing in this guy's stuff, he made me more imaginative. His sense of play helped my sense of play. So there's a scene in which Asher has just told Marie that he loves her. And she says, do not, after a time of war, tell me of love. And he says, why not? You know, I'm the only one at risk. You got nothing to risk. I'm just telling you I'm in love with you. And she says, I don't know anyone who has today what they loved yesterday. Tell me a story. Which is what she says whenever she wants to change the subject. because he has a compulsion. When people say, tell me a story, he tells a story. So this is the story he tells. 2 paragraphs, I promise. It's one of my first memories, he told Marie, remembered as if in dim light when I was 4, at most 5 years old. It was a sweltering day, the house stifling, everyone complaining. My grandfather took a bowl of carrots onto the roof to eat in the shade. Normally, he was as serious as a funeral, dressed all in black, strict about rules and religion. I was frightened of him, though I believe also that I loved him in the manner of a child. We heard his shoes overhead. He was having fun up there. I could hear him calling out to anyone passing by. I went outside and peered up at him from the walk. He waved and hallooed as if I was half a mile off. I can still see the old man's immense beard, pure white, against his traditional garb. Asher was surprised how amused he felt to tell Marie this story, what lightness there was in sharing the memory. When he came back down, there were bits of orange in his beard. It was funny to me, side-splitting really, tiny bits of carrot in the white. Of course, I tried to hide it, holding both hands over my mouth, but I was afraid to say anything about him. It might be considered as criticism when I only meant to be helpful, so I held back behind the door. But my grandmother also had noticed. She went right over, stood in his way, and picked those bits out without comment, every one of them. Then she took the bowl and brushed him along on his way. What Asher did not say to Marie was that this was the love he wanted for his life, where affection was as ordinary as the air. So that's what Marquis Chagall does to me. I should also tell you that I got carried away about the research, kind of fell in love with the research and found myself blowing glass. And I will just tell you, there's words that they have for people who are just like a born natural at blowing glass. Some people are just prodigies, and they have words for them. That's not the words they used with me. They called me pathetic. They're pathetic, and I was just supposed to blow an orb, just a sphere. Nothing fancy. It was all hot. There were people coaching me. Just blow a sphere, and it would be nice and smooth, and just a perfect round surface. It's all I had to do. And the guys going by are like, this guy's pathetic. And they literally were stopping, going, do you see this guy? He's absolutely pathetic. And the guy who runs the shop is like, what's that guy doing there? Because that looks pathetic. Okay, not so good at blowing glass. So then I tried sculpting glass, and I had some help, but I made a glass flower. And if you read the book, you know that there's a glass flower that is kind of a metaphor for love, or at least the love that you're able to have if you're kind of war damaged. And I had a lot of fun making glass flowers. And I got into it enough that I made enough so that every time I had an event during the tour of this book, I would be able to give away a glass flower. Now, do you have that basket of raffles in it? Would you ask Will to pick a number, please? 'Cause pretty sure he won't cheat and make it himself. Yeah, or sing out from where you are, whatever you like. All right. Thank you, Will. And thank you for the help with the raffle. Okay. 436-1598. All right. Glass flower. Congratulations. Would you do me a favor and just open it to make sure it's not broken? And that would that'd be great. Sorry, I only brought one. How'd you do? How we do? Oh, we're still working on it? Okay, we'll come back. Good suspense. Okay. Just let me know if you would. Okay. So then the second question is this book a fairy tale? Remember that? There were 2 questions, right? The second one is it actually possible for people to heal? And this one I really embarked on the book not knowing. And I was still willing to write it if it was a fairy tale. But but it could have a lot more weight if it wasn't. And so I want to go back to this cathedral because I went there to see Chagall's windows. Did we get it? Can I see? Yeah. How did we do? Oh, there you go. All right. There you go. Good. It's made of a crystal quality glass, so it's good for about 350 years, give or take, depending on whether you have cats. Spoken as a cat owner. So this cathedral that was rebuilt, there were some things that went wrong. It was a big deal for me to go there. And as Will mentioned, I got invited to stay at an artist colony there, which is where I also wrote a lot of the first draft of the book. And so when I went to this cathedral, there was a mistake with my flight. I ended up spending about 11 hours in Iceland, which is, a bit of a layover, and in the airport. And then there was a problem with the train getting out from Paris. It was just like one of those things where I thought I'd be there Tuesday at 9 a.m. like cathedral, and it was like Wednesday, an hour before closing time, right? But a lovely day, and I went inside, and it's quite a place inside. It's really something. And I knew that those 3 windows were at the back because I had that book that I showed you the cover of, and because I'd gotten prints of the 3 windows, and I'd actually put them in strips over the window in front of my writing desk. So I've been looking at them for months, like I was just geeking out completely on this stuff. But the pieces of paper I had were, about as wide as a postcard and maybe this long, and the windows themselves are 9 feet by 22, and they would have sunlight shining through them, right? So I got there, and it's just like, this is going to be so amazing. I am not going to, you look at that, and you just think, if only I had roller skates on, right? You could just, boom, you could be right there. So instead, I went around the side. And I don't know why I went clockwise. I just did. And as I was going down the left-hand side, there were these posters, and they were about a meeting that happened. And it was the first meeting after the war of the officials of France with the officials of Germany, the beginning of a process that they called rapprochement. How are these countries going to get along now that the war is over? And the story goes, I heard several versions of it, but this is the one that really stuck with me from a docent there. In this meeting, they took out all the chairs, and they were just like desks on either side, and they had lamps to light it because all the windows were gone and boarded up. And there was a prayer, and then it was called to order, and then the head of the German delegation stood and said, the people of Germany would like to speak first. And the French, being the kind of people they are, were like, mais non, monsieur, no. And he came around in front and knelt down and said, the people of Germany beg the opportunity to speak first. And the head of the French delegation said, we have made our first concession. And the guy stands up and he says, this is the place where France crowned its kings for 1,000 years. And it had windows that were known the world over, and now there are boards. And we have to use these lamps to see. And so I've been instructed to invite the people of France to go find the greatest stained glass windows on earth and install them to take away the boards and bring the light of God back in. And it will be paid for by the people of Germany. True story. And I'm reading this in my pidgin French, not very well, and going along, and then I get to the last piece, and it's Chagall's windows. France picked a Jewish artist. That's the first bridge. Germany paid for it. It's the second bridge. And I'm literally standing there in this cathedral going, it's a novel, it's a novel. You're like, yeah. And by the time I got to the windows themselves, I realized it was more than a novel, it was a parable about what is possible, about how people, in fact, can rebuild, how a polarized nation can mend. If you think about, I guess I skipped it. If you think about today, they have 280 miles of shared border. They have the same currency. You can go from one country to the other without a passport now. They both are under the same umbrella government. Germany and France, this is. They're each other's top trading partner. Took a long time, but it is possible. when I did this, I found that I did have one more question. And the question was, that's what I was looking for, is when you to get from where they were then after the war to now, who does that work? Who does that rebuilding work? And this was interestingly also made clear to me in Nice, because while I was there, I also went to the home turned into museum of Henri Matisse. And he just got himself a little shack, kind of beach shack, a little bungalow to hang out in. He moved there when he was 81. He was ill and frail. He many days could not hold up a paintbrush, which is part of why he was doing so much of the scissor art. And then there was one of his assistants who put together a mechanism so that he could paint from bed, and this person would hold kind of the lever so that he could move the paint on the canvases. And there was this long wall, probably as long as this wall, and about the same height, where he would put his canvases. And it would always be like he'd get his bed wheeled to a clear space, and he would work there. And when he was done, they would take the canvas off, and there'd be the white square where the canvas was, and there'd be the colors of the paint that were used all on the wall around the outside of it. So it'd be like almost like a little like the shadow. Do you know what I mean? There'd be the negative space where the painting was, and then if it was a green painting, there'd be like a green stuff with a white center in the middle. And he was there from when he was 81 till when he died when he was 85. It was actually a little under 4 years the way it worked out. Okay? And so when I went there, for some reason that day, they wouldn't let you really check out his studio, but I got to see the wall, and it looked like this. From 81 to 84, unable to lift a brush, the guy worked and worked and worked and worked. And to me, that also was a parable. Who is going to do this work? We are. That's what I got for you tonight. Thanks. Thanks. Thank you. You know, it's kind of a dirty trick to have one of the greatest artists in history be your presentation, because, you know, you're clapping. It's like, well, I know it's Mark. You know, it's all right, my buddy Mark. He's looking over all of us. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Happy to take any questions you have at all about anything. Shy people. Yes, ma'am.
Your last 3 books have been World War II era. Why?
Well, the last 3 books have been World War II era, and why? Well, the first thing is, boy, there's like 10 answers to that. The first is that I think we've spent the last 5,000 years examining different models of male heroism, and that there's been about 40 years of examining female heroism in literature. And so I think there's a lot of different models and approaches, and so this one is more male-oriented, but the other ones are not. They're very much female character, female narrator, female-centric, because I think they're just really interesting kinds of heroism. And, you know, The Baker's Secret, I don't think there'd been a character in literature like Emma, you know, when we've had 30 different versions of James Bond, right? And so that's a piece of it. I wanted to examine that. The other is, you know, there's been, since 9/11, Hollywood has decided the story that America wants to see. The story America, and they're right, the story Americans want to see on the screen is somebody with incredible powers and high moral purpose who is going to save us all. They're very messianic, right? And they've made billions of dollars with these stories of various kind of messianic characters. And meanwhile, there's also been a literature of World War II, which I didn't realize I was participating in. I was just writing stories. But I look around and see what my friends are writing and what's on the bookstore shelves, and there's a lot of it. And all those stories, there's no superhero. It's ordinary folk who are in over their heads. What are you going to do now? You're a 20-year-old mathematician, and suddenly you're working to build the detonator of the atomic bomb in the universe of 2. What do you do? You got a 20-year-old's understanding of the world and conscience. You know, what are you going to do? And so again, that was like, it felt to me like that was an important way to represent it, because I don't think any superhero is, you know, if America is going to return to what it was, it's not going to be because of a president, I don't believe. It's going to be because of a people. And the president and Congress will follow. That's my belief anyway. But And that's not to me meant to be a political statement. It's much more an artistic one, actually, why I would write this. This book was different. I really wanted to write a rebuilding story. I wanted to find or tell a rebuilding story. When it was January of 2021, when I started this book, I really wanted to write. I felt like that's a book that America will want to read by the time I can get it done and out in the world. And the response has been unbelievable. And, the people that I've seen, I started this tour on the 19th of June. And I will tell you, the people have turned out like nothing I've experienced in my life. It's my 7th book, and it's as many people as the previous 6 put together. It's been unbelievable. And I don't think that's about me. I think it's partly people want to be able to gather, and there is a spontaneous community that happens in the arts, music or books or whatever. And I think people really want a rebuilding story. And a week ago today, I was in Indianapolis, where I've never been before, and there were 500 people. They wanted a rebuilding story. And I'd done an event the night before, and everyone told people about the rebuilding story. So I really wanted to tell that. So that's why it starts a month after the war. There are memories of the war that occur in this book, but there are no battles. There's no one in uniform. There's no regiments or battalions or platoons or any of that. And I can tell you that the stuff I'm working on now is not historical, and my first 2 novels weren't. But I wanted to examine how, and I think about in The Baker's Secret, I would not survive in that world. I would not take orders from the German captain and he'd just shoot and kill me. That'd be that, right? And so it's a humbling thing to write that and go, I would not survive. Emma is better than me at that sort of circumstance. So it's that. Partly it's I want to examine female heroism, and partly it is that I wanted to write a rebuilding story. I think we need one. I think we need a lot of them. And not somebody who's going to fly in here with a cape on. If I thought that would work, I'd be wearing a cape right now. Another person, please. Thank you for the question. By the way, also, love getting a question about 3 books. Yeah. Okay. Yes, please. So the question is, will this be translated into French, and what do the French people think about it? And the answer to the first question is no. The French really they have translated other books of mine, but the 2 books that are set in France, they have not done. They feel like I'm an appropriating Yankee, and I can stay home with my lousy pages and my weak brie, and they will have, spread theirs on perfect baguettes, and will have contempt for my work. No, I'm joking, but no, they don't have any interest in translating me. My other French book was D-Day from the French perspective. They do not want that story told by an American. That said, this whole thing of the French people being dismissive and contemptuous of Americans is the complete opposite of what I experienced when I was in Normandy researching D-Day for The Baker's Secret. And I said to people, I went in the off season, and I told people I was there to learn about D-Day. If it was any time after 11 o'clock in the morning, there was a free calvados brought to my table, and sometimes a free meal. When you are standing at the intersection of Allies Road and Hero Boulevard, which exists in Arromanches, when you're standing at that place, you know that there's a keen appreciation. There's the longest boulevard in Normandy, ends at a giant statue, and you can see it from 2 miles away. And I thought, who's it going to be? De Gaulle? Who's it going to be? And I get there, and it's Eisenhower. You can't graduate from high school in Normandy without writing an essay or long paper on one of the graves in the American cemetery. So there's very much that kind of appreciation. Now, with the Chagall stuff, it was a little different because people are really protective of those windows, and I wanted to touch them. I wanted to get as close as I could. I wanted to go to the place where his windows were made. The nice thing about Reims, it's kind of a pit. And for some reason, it was reassuring to me that there's a city in France that's a pit, And then I found out that it was also the political center of the Champagne region. And so, I had to do my research, and they have the caves and stuff like that. Some people are willing to suffer for their art. Mostly the French people loved the investigation of it, loved the questions that I was asking because I would stay. Like that when I saw those plaques, this one guy was like, you're blocking traffic. And another guy said, why are you blocking traffic? And I said, well, I'm writing a book about this, and this just amazed me. I didn't know this. He said, you came here to research this, and you didn't even know Chagall was the guy? I said, no. He said, let me walk with you. And then he told me the story that I related to you. about the, wishing to speak first. That was told to me as I'm walking to the windows, and so he was keenly interested in the American knowing what the correct story was, and so they were lovely. Also, I found whenever I'm dealing with a French person and they get going too fast, they will say, "Do you speak French?" And I say, "Oui, mais malheureusement comme un chien," which is yes, unfortunately, like a dog. And they would laugh, and we would be friends. And I would say, if we can keep everything in present tense, we're going to be friends. And they were really nice. They were very helpful, very generous people. There are things they do that really well. Yes, sir.
Years ago, I read a series of articles, Writers at Work.
Yes.
It really opened my eyes to very just unlimited number of ways that writers write. I'm curious about your method of writing.
My method of writing is both helped and hindered by the fact that I spent 20 years in newspapers. So a lot of writers I know, good friends of mine, they get up in the morning to write, and they got 3 hours of agony and procrastination and cleaning the refrigerator and all of that stuff before they even can write a sentence, but write a word. And I have my cup of coffee, and I go down and I turn on the computer, and I begin to write. I feel like great advantage from journalism. The problem is it also teaches you to bang it out, which is not how you make art. There's really no art form you can bang it out. Maybe haiku, but even that takes a little thought, And so, I don't know, limerick? There's just not a lot of quick art forms. And but because I work that way, I just say, okay, that's how it is. And I just write the first draft, and I have ideas, and things change along the way. And I'm concentrating. I work typically early in the morning. Most days I'm at my desk by 5:30. If I'm really head up in the first draft, later part of the first draft, I'll wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I haven't set, and if I don't have a plane to make, I haven't set an alarm in 20 years. It wakes me up and I'm ready to go. And so I work in the morning. The phone doesn't ring. The emails are quiet. All of that. There's no distractions except nature. And so the sun coming up, where I work, I look due east. So like right now, the sunrises are pretty great. They come at like 8 o'clock, but they come. Anyway, so I work till about noon. All of that time, I am concentrating as hard as I can. Yes, it's imagination, but it's also like, what is this character like? How does he speak? How's he dressed? Where is he in the room? What's the weather that day? What does he want out of this scene? How does this scene work in the structure of the novel? What is being advanced here? What suspense is being increased? All of those things I'm concentrating so hard. And it's not until I get to the end that I can acknowledge that all that time, my subconscious mind is working every bit as hard. And it is smarter and more inventive and more metaphorical. And so when I go back, I get to the end and I go, now I know what the story is. And I see all the stuff that my subconscious has done and it's better. And I go back through from start to finish, and I make it all coherent. I may change a character's name 3 times in the first draft. I don't bother going back to fix it, just get it done. Get a story, and then say, all right, now what was my subconscious doing? And it turns out it was about something else. This book is a lot about my relationship with religious faith. I didn't know that. It turns out I was influenced by the Old Testament a lot more than I realized. I didn't know that. There's things that emerge. The sentence that he dreamt of a life where affection was as ordinary as the air, I wrote on the day our relationship ended, when I had wanted that. And it wasn't until I went back and went, wait, I know when I wrote that. I didn't even realize that I was sad about that relationship when I was just telling my story that day. I really trust the subconscious stuff, and so I do a lot of rewriting. Because the first draft is so fast, I typically spend more time in revision than I do in writing the first draft. I can write a first draft in 6 or 7 months, but I might spend a year and a half rewriting it. So that's mainly my process. And then I have a couple of novelists that I trust. Maybe you know Jenna Bloom here in Boston, best-selling author. Really, really smart. And Dawn Tripp, who lives in Westport, Massachusetts, which is it's one town over. It's right next to Little Compton, Rhode Island. Also a brilliant novelist. And both really smart women writers. And so they give me the writer's response and a female response. And if they think I'm out of line on something, they let me know. They're not shy about it. And then I sometimes will have I usually have experts, like I had glassmakers read this. And they're not readers very much. So I'd be like, can you just finish it? Just please. And then my agent, who's really tough, and then my editor, who gives me the feedback that leads to the revision for the book that comes out. And I can tell you that I never stop revising what I read to you tonight, for example, about a third of that was different from the actual print edition. And I carry one with me all the time, but I used to be like in the middle of reading something, and I'd just be like, no, it's got to be this word. And somebody asked me, like, when is your book finished? And I was like, never, and there's blue all over the page. That's my process, way writers work. You know, it gets it done process. Thanks for the question. Yes, ma'am.
So I have two very different questions.
Okay.
So the first question is sort of a fun question, and that is Marie's outfits. Marie had beautiful clothes. This woman had
Thank you.
fabulous clothes and hats and accessories. Now, it seemed to me that that was not quite in the appropriate, in the period, right? How did she retain all of these things when she lived through this horrible war?
Well, what she's talking about is how, if you haven't read it, how Marie is in bright colors. And I blew you a kiss because it makes me so happy when a reader catches stuff that I'm doing that I think the reader is not really catching, but they're still experiencing it. Okay, so I'm thinking about this very gray, drab site. You think about the picture of me blowing glass, and it's like a little factory cement floor kind of thing, and that it's very hot, that sort of thing. And then along comes this woman, and she's wearing a dress that is the color of coffee with milk in it. Right? And in fact, it's a way, I want her to be beautiful without ever describing her so that every reader can project their own notion of beauty onto her. And the way that I make her pop up in any moment is that she's in color. And so there's a time when Asher walks out and he's literally sitting on a bench watching his sweat fall on the ground in front of him, and she says hello, and he looks up and she's in this sky blue dress. It's like, ha ha, you know, in The Wizard of Oz, it's black and white in Kansas, but it's in color in Oz. I wanted that experience for the reader, so there would be a way that she would pop in the imagination. And the way that she affords it is that she's a woman in France. It's as simple as that. You know, that it matters very much to her. And it's actually part of her, I think, part of her recovery from the war. But it really was to make her rise in the reader's imagination.
Well, I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you spotting that.
Now, the second thing had to do with, he has some very profound comments, very pithy lines about grief.
Yes.
Those resonated quite clearly with me since I lost my husband recently.
I'm so sorry.
But I wonder what your inspiration was to get those profound comments.
I have had my share. Haven't we all? I'm sorry that you lost your husband. The line that sticks with me that I've said since, and I don't quote myself, the book is done and I move on, but there's a line that grief is the most involuntary form of love. And this is how Asher feels about his daughter. And there's even a moment when he has put his daughter's face in a window. And the window's gone up, and everyone's so impressed with it, except one guy who's not impressed with anything. And they're sitting at the dinner table that night, and everyone is left except that unimpressed guy and Asher who made the window. And the guy says, you know, everyone was all excited about your window, but it really wasn't that good. And Asher's like, really? What didn't you like about it? And now he's got a knife in his hand. He says, well, I thought the colors weren't that imaginative, and this and that and this and that. And he's like, really? And he's just about to send it. And he said, yeah, it only had one good thing. And he's like, oh yeah, what's that? Because he's just about to end this guy's life. And he says, the face on that child. It's the most beautiful face I've ever seen in stained glass. And he's talking about Asher's daughter. You know, and he can't, you know, and like, we have all known loss in our lives. We all have. And there is that involuntary, there's something that happens, and it's like, there it comes right up. It doesn't happen so much anymore. My dad died a long time ago. But for a while, a lot of the kind of working men in Vermont smoked his cigarettes, Camel non-filters. And every once in a while, I'd smell one. Where is he? The scent had so much. So yeah, I write about grief. Also, I think that's part of the healing after war. There's enormous grieving to be done. You know, part of what's going on in the Middle East right now is an act of grief. And it's a grief from 1945 in some ways, I think. I'm not enough of a scholar to say something like that, so maybe not. But I think grief is huge in that situation. So that's why. Sorry for all our losses, you know. That's a heavy place to go, but yeah. I think we should answer those questions in the other order. So the reason she wears a bright color is you see. So who's got another good question? How I celebrate when I'm done. Yes, please.
Your choice of naming, so Marc Chagall, Judaism was so important to him and what he was about, and yet your Mark in the book is a Catholic, his Catholicism is so important in his Christianity. I thought that was an interesting choice.
It was because it was a different Mark. Here's why. The studio that made, Marc Chagall didn't actually do the assembly of his windows. He designed them, he would paint them, and there was an atelier in Reims that would build them for him. And that's why they were able to build 4 windows after he died, actually, to fulfill a commission in Mainz, in Germany. And, but that place, that is that studio that has been making windows for 425 years in Reims is called L'Atelier Brigitte Marc. So what I did was I gave, okay, well, this couple who owns a place, one will be called Brigitte and one will be called Marc. So it wasn't after Chagall, it was after the place where, but that's just like, they call them Easter eggs, where you put a little present to yourself in there. Like, no, I'm not gonna give any away. Well, I just know there are people who haven't read it, so I don't want to wreck it. But just pay attention to the dogs, okay? The dogs maybe are more than just passing by. Maybe the dogs are something more than just dogs. Thank you for the question. Yes, sir.
In the synopsis, and what you just talked about is that piece about how he was holding that knife so close, and that violence is kind of right beneath the surface of the workers at the chateau. What inspired, I guess I have 2 questions related. Did Chagall go through a similar sort of transformation in his own life? You mentioned how he was joyful at the end. He was hiding things at the beginning. Did he find that kind of redemption towards as his life progressed? And if he didn't, where did you get that inspiration for these people getting healed over time?
Yeah, he did not have, I mean, as I gave you the numbers of what happened to his community, and everyone died, and everyone in his family died, and everyone he knew died. And so there was that level of monumental loss that was, you know, the experience of Jewish people all over Europe, including Eastern Europe, where he was from. There is not really a good biography of Marc Chagall, and there's one that's considered definitive, and I couldn't finish it, and I really wanted to. I was writing a book about it, and I couldn't finish it. And so there is an autobiography that Chagall wrote, and he wrote it when he was 27. Like, yeah, I've done everything important I'm going to do, you know. I guess maybe it was an act of humility, maybe it was hubris. I can't decide, but so there's a lot that I don't know about that, but I do know that he rose, when he came to Paris, he rose very, very fast. And you know, within a matter of months, Picasso was like, when are you going back to Russia? You know, they were friends, but also competitive. So that's in terms of that part. It's not based on Chagall. In terms of how they manage with the grief, Asher had to be a violent man to survive the war. And also, he had rage. He had great, great desire for vengeance. And that's why he became an assassin. And in fact, every time he had a successful assassination, the resistance would give him a big meal. And so literally killing people was how he stayed fed. You know, and so literally that's like Pavlovian. That's like feed the dog when the bell rings. And so, so that's a thing he's wrestling with. And it's right there beside his grief over his wife and daughter. And so these two things, it's all so layered. I'll tell you that where it clarified for me, once it was clear, then I didn't put words around it, it was just the way it was in the whole book, was this will not give much away for folks who haven't read it, but there's one point where a woman goes by and an apple falls off of her vegetable, a tomato falls off her vegetable cart. And he picks it up and he kind of dusts it off, and he's absolutely starving, and he begins eating this tomato. And as he's eating it, he remembers a day that his wife came to him at work, and there was a perfect tomato from the garden, and she brought it to him to eat, and she didn't just leave it there, she stayed there with him while he ate it. And he's having this memory, and he's weeping. while he's eating the tomato, and he's so starving he doesn't stop. He's still crying while he's eating, and he has his hand out to catch like the juice from the tomato. And when he finishes the whole thing, he drinks the juice, but it's also been salted by his tears, and it tastes better. And then I knew what his relationship with grief was like, and what his recovery was going to be like, and that it was flavored. His life was flavored by it, and in some way improved by it. But it was also a thing he was going to have to work out over a long time. And it's not until the kind of transcendent decision he makes at the end, right? Marie says, you two could kill each other, or you could look at what you've built and imagine what you could build, and they do some imagining, and off they go. Sorry if I'm wrecking the ending. It's not a they lived happily ever after ending. It's a they rode off into the sunset ending. And, but they're not just going off into the sunset. They're going off to do great things in the world. And that, to me, was like he had made it. He didn't need the tomato anymore. Would be just the tomato. How's that to be for being cryptic? How about a question that's not about the book, about stained glass, about Chagall, about France, about, yes, sir?
Well, I want to ask about, the difference, as you said, with Chagall, who didn't make the glass,
Right.
but did the art. But the difference between that kind of creation and the folks who actually make the glass and form it up and cut it and mold it into something that goes into the
Yes.
frame of the wall. I mean, what's the difference between those two kinds of creativity?
Well, the people who actually assemble the thing are working with lead all the time, and so they don't live as long. It's a very different kind of work. One is very much expansive. Here's the canvas I have. It happens to be the glass instead of paint I'm using for colors, but it's as large as that. Okay? But it also has that shape. It's got to have that medallion in the top, and it's got to have these shapes, you know? But it's a pretty large canvas to work on, and once I have it, then it's the job of people who know this, how to make it so that it doesn't crush itself. These things will last forever, and they'll take all kinds of weather and wind and temperatures and all of that. And it can be totally warm here and 20 below out there, and it's okay. It's pretty amazing, actually. But if you carry them like a table, they will shatter from their own weight, right? So there's a whole almost engineering kind of skill set. And I think that that's very similar with sculptors. You know, most Rodin bronzes he didn't do. He didn't do the actual bronze casting. There were people who did that who were bronze experts, but he made the molds that led to the creation of that. And I think that's common practice that artists will do that, especially at that level, right? It's the design intellect as opposed to the execution, which is more of a, are we good? I think we're good. So I hope you will all go out and make great art and leave really cool squares on the wall of the things of beauty that you make. And even if you take them away, that there will be a sign that you were part of the bridge building, that you were part of making the world beautiful again. Thanks so much for your time tonight. Great. I'm going that way to sign books, but I'm happy to chat with you more too. And thanks for being here. I want that too.